Hi everyone, and welcome to our next edition of YA Meet the Creator. And I am beyond excited today to be bringing you news of the most stunning book that I've been lucky enough to get over the past months. So this morning I'm going to be talking to Burley Doherty and Tamsin Rosewell about their absolutely wonderful new book, which is called The Sea Maiden's Odyssey. So welcome both of you. Thank you very much for coming to talk to us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I can see, Tamsin, in the background that there's one beautiful image there.
That's it, Rosaline in the corner. Yeah, this is one of the original paintings. I work traditionally not digital. I don't work digitally at all. I'm the kind of person who can't even get a parking app to work, so it's ink on canvas for me. And this is the image, which is the throne room scene, which is a critical event from which the events are really triggered. So yeah, you'll see
It's
that
just
in the
so
book.
beautiful, so beautiful. Burley, would you be happy to start us off with a little bit of a reading from the book, please?
Sure. How long about would you like it to be?
Maybe a couple of pages.
Okay. Well, this bit is not quite the beginning of the book because it begins in a different place almost, but it's the beginning of the central story. Mary would never forget the day her sister Yanya was stolen. It haunted her like a ghostly shark shadow, never leaving her. There was the sound of screaming, of wailing songs, of utter turmoil above her head. She struck up through the water, desperate to find the cause of the harrowing cries. When she neared the surface, she saw her sisters and her mother in a puddle of terror, frantically trying to pull apart the thick ropes of a net. Something was inside it, and now she could see that it was her sister, her beautiful favourite sister friend. "Yanya!" Merrin screamed, and her sister turned her terrified face towards her as the net was hauled up out of the water towards a boat of jeering men monsters. "Come here, my beauty. Let me get my arms round you," one of the men shouted. The more Yanya struggled to be free, the more her arms became entangled in the ropes of the net. Terrified by the men's yells and coarse laughter, Merrin's older sisters, Aidan and Tess, and her Aunt Hannon dropped away from the net one by one. Their arms held high in supplication. Only their mother clung on. One of the men shouted, "Are you coming too, old witch?" He drove a hooked stick down towards her, and with a despairing wail she flung up her arms and fell backwards into the sea. Her eyes streamed with blood. Helpless now, her sisters watched as the men dragged the net onto their fishing boat. Crabs and fishes and a dolphin were flung unwanted overboard, and the boat skimmed away with the high waves tossing round it. Merrin was quite sure she would never see Yanya again. She could hear her screams. She could hear the shouts and excited laughter of the fishermen as the boat sped away with its precious cargo, and the seagulls streamed round it, filling the air with their sobbing cries. "Save yourselves, my sisters!" Yanya's distant voice rang out and then faded as the light of the setting sun fades into the ocean, into memory, into dreams.
You almost don't want to start talking afterwards, do you, Tamsin? It's a bit like, that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Burley. So,
Thank you.
Obviously, it's very much a fable-like story, but I wanted to know, is there any basis in fact? And what was the inspiration for the story?
Well, I have just moved house, but until a week ago, I lived in Edale in the Peak District, and way up on Kinder, there is a pool which is known as the Mermaid's Pool, and this is far, we're kind of equidistant from the sea on both sides of the country, so a long way from the sea, a pool with a mermaid in it. And several people do say they've seen a mermaid in it. Well, I've trudged up there a few times and never seen a mermaid. But I too was haunted by the idea of a mermaid, a beautiful sea creature, actually appearing in a pool on a mountain. And so that's what inspired the story, really.
And did that mean that you had to do further research around the pool?
Well, there are various ideas of how the mermaid got there. None of them, of course, been verified. There are several more mermaid pools. There's 2 more in the area, within about one in Staffordshire and one further into Derbyshire. So it would be nice to think that there are underwater passages linking the 3 and the ocean, but who knows? And some local folklore is attached to the idea that one mermaid, there's no explanation of how they came to be there, but of the kind of anger and damage that a sea creature caused or threatened to cause is kind of reported. So she's never really been seen as a benign creature.
Burley and I are both fascinated by folklore, and we had a discussion quite early on about what we saw as possibly our lost folklore of inland mermaids. So we think of them as great ocean sort of creatures, ocean spirits. But actually we've got a lot of, our lakes and ponds, and really about as far from the sea as you can get on this island, have got mermaid stories attached to it, and other sort of pond dwelling creatures like Jenny Greenteeth, who pops up in this story as well. They're all in there. So I think that mutual love of folklore and where it's come from and its importance, I think was very very much part of the creation of this book.
And one of my earlier books was about a Selkie, daughter of the sea. So I've always been fascinated by sea creatures and the kind of magical quality and folk quality of the stories attached to them.
Well, I found, for me, one of the first things that struck me, Tamsin, and I think it will be true of most people, is the glowing, absolutely glowing colour that jumps at you off each and every page. Was that hard to decide what coloration to use, and who came up with the idea of using silhouettes?
Okay, so the colour is actually a very specific colour. So where Burley and I started the conversation, really very early on in the creation of the book, was about what we wanted our sea maidens to look like. If you use the word mermaid, it conjures up a particular set of images and associations, and we sort of wanted to be able to step away from that a little bit. We wanted them to look beautiful, but also very other. We wanted them to look, perhaps more like tropical fish, or we didn't want to go with the sort of sequin tails and sparkly clam bras and things like that. We didn't want to go there. And our first thought was actually we would almost color code them, so you could tell which mermaid was which, with all these sisters and these extended families. And then so my sketchbooks are full of different images of what mermaids might look like, and what Jenny Greenteeth might look like. And then my designer, Becky Chilcott, my wonderful designer, came along and she said, oh, no, actually, I think you should be working in silhouette, pure black silhouette with the boldness of your colour, because the colour is, your use of colour is so bold that it, she felt it would show it off. And it's also a really classical language of the telling of folklore and fairy tales. And, for me as well, I felt very strongly, as someone who was brought up in a mixed race, mixed faith family in central London, that, my colouring was always a little bit different and I didn't look like the other kids at school. And actually, I think it removes all of that, is that if you're in silhouette, you can project onto that anything you want. You can put yourself into it much more easily. It can be you in your circumstances. And we find silhouette work all over the world. We can trace it right back to those Greek vases, all those mythological creatures and sirens on Greek vases, and even back to Neolithic art through Arthur Rackham, Jan Pinkowski more recently, of course. The colour is actually a specific one called Blue Viridian, and I made the colour myself using actually powdered Blue Viridian, which is highly toxic, so I had to be quite careful, in the using of the powder of it. But I wanted to create a colour that was Merrin, our heroine's safe colour. This blue, which is where she lives, this beautiful blue out in the ocean. So when we get, as you'll notice as you go through the book, when we get into some of the darker scenes, more difficult scenes, that colour changes, and you can perhaps look out. If the story is being read to you and you're looking at the images, look out for that use of blue, and where does it trail off, and where is it hinted in places to keep her safe. So I've used colour in all kinds of ways in this book. It's certainly got a boldness to it, but it has its own character as well, I think.
Definitely, without a doubt. The themes in the book I found were very touching as well, because it's very much a book about family. But of course, it also touches on abuse. It touches on sexual abuse when we're looking at the fisherman. There are other things that come in. But was the family theme something that was really important to you, Burley?
Yes, it was. Especially the female line.
Yeah.
I think I've got a bit of a problem in that I didn't have any grandparents. They'd all died before I was born. And luckily I've got 7 grandchildren. But that kind of link from generation to generation is such a powerful link, not only often physically, but emotionally and in characteristics and all kinds of talents and things like that. And so I very much like doing writing books that link generations in that sort of way. And also the sense of sisterhood was a very powerful thing for me. And I've got girls in each of my 3 groups of families. So they were the themes that I very much wanted to play on. And what happens when a girl becomes a teenager, that sense of closeness, especially with the parents, and perhaps especially with the father, begins to distance itself. And my character is kind of torn between love of the parents and torn between her need to be herself, to express herself, to find what she wants to do in life.
I found that was so well done, because the whole rebellion against the way things always have been, her mother is very much in her dad's shadow, and is an appendage really to her father, in that her father is the one that's got all the power. And I love the way those sort of stereotypes were challenged, and I think it is extremely empowering for young girls, because we still need it. We still need it now,
Yeah.
Sadly, with some of the things that have become a bit too prevalent on social media, it is very important to empower young girls, I think. Okay, and I'll stop, get off my soapbox now, but I felt very strongly about that as well. It has to be said, I do feel very, very strongly about it. So, as you said, Tamsin, you don't like to work digitally, which, can I say, is slightly unusual nowadays. We do hear lots of illustrators that do work digitally. So what is your process like when you are doing illustrations like this?
Okay, I've nothing against digital art. I think, I can absolutely see why illustrators use it, and a lot of my favorite illustrators are working digitally. I don't not paint digitally because I've got anything against it. I do it because I have no idea how to do it. So that's a completely different thing. For my process, my starting point is the color. So my sketchbooks, I've got a sketchbook next to me, and I think this was actually working on the Haunted Hills, but you can see this is my starting point. So I will really refine and define what my color palette is. So I've got pages and pages that look like this throughout my sketchbooks, where I'm trying to work out what the interaction is between colors, how well they work together, how subtle I need to make that. In this case, we've got a subtle use of color. It looks like it's all just blue, but there's actually perhaps 20 different shades of blue, and then the green creeping in. And I've got to compare that. I've got to have really heavily contrast that with the black, which means that you can't use certain deeper shades of blue, or if you do, you're really blurring your character into their environment, which is certainly a useful thing. My starting point beyond the colour is actually mathematics, and I think this often, surprises when I talk to school groups. There's the kids who think, oh, I'm not into, books or art. I'm a maths person. I'm a science person. Well, the science of colour has always fascinated me. How humans react to colour, and also the mathematics. So, there's that opening page in the book, the scene that Burley's just read, I placed underneath that a double Fibonacci sequence. So you've got these spirals that are perhaps familiar to people. So there's one spiral that moves around and ends on Yanya in the net, and the other spiral goes the other way and ends on the moon. So the visual effect of that is that actually your eye doesn't quite know where to rest. So that you get almost this sort of mental rocking motion. My intention was to make you almost feel slightly seasick looking at that image, because your eye is constantly going from one to the next, because I haven't enabled you a place to rest. So I'll often divide structures, into threes. So I've got like this one here, I've got very clearly my foreground, my midground, and the background. You probably can't see on the picture, but if you look in the book, we've got all these sort of shadowy, ghostly shipwrecks, outside. So I've got this sort of foreground distance and middle distance. And then, I've got the structures of these ionic columns, again with the spirals on it. So the spirals all the way through the book. My style, I'll often draw in pencil and very carefully rule out the maths of an image before I start painting. And I've never worked with another illustrator, so I don't know how normal this is. But I think mathematics and art and are very closely connected, and I also think those two are connected to music. So Burley and I have talked about this in the past, that connection between storytelling and music, and the rhythm of listening to somebody read and looking at art, and how the art works and how the music works. I actually think all these things are interconnected. So for me, this is a huge process which requires me to do everything from mathematics through to looking at color theory.
That is absolutely fascinating. I would never have thought about maths being involved in art, which is absolutely wonderful. It's been delightful talking to you both, and as I say, I'm still stroking the book at the side of me, because it is just a thing of beauty. So thank you very much for coming along to talk to us about it.
Thank you, Bev. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Yeah.